For a moment, every
Madam President.
microphone light in that hearing
Senator
room
from
seemed to go
Louisiana.
dark. Senator Kennedy leaned back,
Thank you,
folded his
Madam
notes,
President.
and said
With
9
every
words that
time
nobody on the panel
I,
was expecting. This kind of
look
thing,
at
he said
or
slowly,
read an article
requires
about the
a
one
plan.
big,
And the way it
beautiful bill.
landed in that room, against the
I am
silence
in
that followed,
in
told
the
you
one big,
everything
beautiful
about
bill.
what he was actually saying.
And,
Across the witness table, Pam
I hate
Bondi's
to
polite
read,
half-smile
we
stiffened.
continued the
Her pen
20%
stopped
income,
mid-note.
deduction for
The word he had
LLCs.
used so
We
carefully,
repealed
the one that
From
sounded
all the
reasonable
great things
but
Donald
carried
Trump has
enormous
done.
weight,
There is
was
no
hanging
evidence
in the air
that
between
Donald
them.
Trump has committed a
And
crime.
that word
Everyone knows
was
that.
legitimacy.
IRS reporting requirements
Kennedy started
for gig
simply.
workers. Nobody
He
ever
asked Bondi
talks
whether
about
they
that.
could
That was
agree
huge.
that legitimacy matters. Not a trick question, not a
we passed
political trap,
school
a
choice
foundational
tax credits.
question about how a
First
justice
time
system
Congress
works
has
and
ever
why
done
people
something
choose to
like
follow
that.
it. Bondi
We
said
enhanced
yes. Of course she
529
said yes,
education
because there
savings
is no
accounts.
other
We
answer.
provided full
Legitimacy
expensing
is
for
the reason
research
people
and
pay their
development.
taxes,
I mean, I
serve
could
on
keep
juries,
going here. We
accept
reformed
verdicts they
Medicaid.
disagree with, and
We,
comply with
ended
laws they
federal
did not
payments
vote
for
for.
abortion
Without
and
legitimacy,
gender surgery
the
and
entire
sex
system
change
runs on
operations.
force
We amended
alone,
the
and force alone has
2017
never been
tax
enough to
cuts.
hold a society together
we
for
saved
long.
$1.3
Kennedy pushed
trillion.
further. Can we agree,
Well,
he
obvious
asked,
question when
that
I
the
make that
legitimacy
statement
of the American
is,
criminal justice system
how'd you do
depends
that?
in significant part
How'd you get past
on the
filibuster
Department of Justice?
at its
Bondi
breadth?
said yes again. And then Kennedy
It's such
laid
an
the next piece
expansive
down.
piece of
If
legislation.
Americans come to believe that the
We cut
DOJ is
taxes on
operating in
Social
ways that are
Security.
unfair,
We provided
that it is
deductions
applying
for
the
car
law
owners.
selectively,
We
that it is
increased
protecting
standard
some
deduction.
people while
Is
pursuing
that
others, does that not
we did it
undermine their
without
willingness
Democratic
to
votes.
accept the outcomes of that system?
We did it with
Bondi said
all
yes.
Republican votes.
Does it not
I wish that
reduce
hadn't been the
compliance
case.
with the
I
laws
wish
we pass
we
and
had
the rules
been
we
able to
create?
convince some of our
Yes,
Democratic
Senator.
colleagues to join.
And if that
Majority
happens,
vote is
does
required.
chaos not
60
follow?
votes aren't required.
Bondi
do
paused
it with a
slightly,
majority vote.
then said yes. And
My
the social
only
contract,
regret,
Kennedy continued, is
with respect to the
violated.
bill,
Bondi agreed again.
Chamber floor. Thank
4
you.
yeses
Thank
in
you,
a
Madam
row,
President.
each one
I
building
think
on the
of
last,
reconciliation
each one
as sort
tightening
of
the
a
frame
mini
around
budget.
what was coming
Now,
next.
that's
Because
a
Kennedy was not
gross
asking
example.
abstract
Ask senators to
philosophical
please take the
questions about
conversation.
justice
As to
theory.
much of his
He was building a foundation. He was getting Bondi on the record agreeing
I
that
think of
legitimacy
reconciliation
matters,
as sort
that the
of
DOJ is central to
American
it,
people.
that selective
We
enforcement
made them
destroys it,
permanent.
and
We
that the
cut taxes
destruction
on
of it
tips.
leads to
We cut
chaos.
taxes on over.
And then he was going to
That's
show
how we
her
passed
exactly
one
what
big, beautiful
selective
bill.
enforcement looks like.
That's how-
Not in theory, in practice,
That's how
with
President
names.
Biden passed over
The first name
simplification
was
and
Michael Avenatti.
exaggeration, but,
Kennedy asked if she
and we
remembered
can't do
him.
everything
Bondi said
in
yes.
reconciliation.
This
Kennedy
is so
described him the way
ridiculous,
the public once
and that
saw
they are
him,
trying
a
to
media star, an attorney who
deflect
appeared on CNN more than Wolf
But we can
Blitzer,
do a lot.
a man who became a hero
We
to
can
certain
do a
parts of
lot.
the media, specifically because he was relentlessly and loudly
well, as you
critical
know,
of
Madam
Donald
President,
Trump.
we did it
He was
through
everywhere. He
reconciliation.
was celebrated. He was treated as a
Under
serious figure with
reconciliation,
serious things to
only a
say about
majority.
power
I could
and
go on
accountability.
for
And then
20 more
Kennedy
minutes.
asked where Avenatti
It's
is
just an
today.
extraordinary piece of
Bondi's answer
legislation.
was straightforward.
We
He
did.
is
We
sitting
can
in
do 2
prison,
more.
she
The
said,
first of
because he was a
3
fraudster,
potential
and the Department of
reconciliation
Justice helped put him there.
We
Kennedy let that
in 5
land,
months you can
and
learn
then he
language.
moved to the
You have
next
to
name,
work at it every day.
Sam
We
Bankman-Fried,
passed
the founder of FTX,
the
the man who built
reconciliation
one of the
bill
largest
on
cryptocurrency
July 1.
exchanges in the world, became a
how to
billionaire,
play
cultivated
musical
relationships with politicians across the
in
political
5 months
spectrum,
you can write a
appeared
book.
before Congress as a responsible
months you
voice
can
for
start us
crypto
with members of the
regulation,
media
and
not aware
donated
of is
enormous
we
sums
have
of
the
money to
authority before the
causes and
midterm
candidates
elections
that made him look like
to
a
do 2
serious
more
and principled
reconciliation
person.
bills.
He too was celebrated.
The first
he
one
too
that
was
passed 5
treated as
months ago.
someone
You know,
whose
you can do
opinion
a
on the
lot in
future
5
of
months.
finance mattered. He
5
too
months
was a
around
media
here is a long
presence,
time
a
ago.
public
It takes 60
intellectual of
votes.
sorts, someone the
You don't have to
establishment
be an
took seriously.
astrophysicist to know that
And
about the
then
United
the
States
money was
Senate.
gone.
Small
Billions
business.
of it. And Bankman-Fried was sitting in a courtroom.
In 5
Then
months,
in a cell.
during World
Kennedy's
War II,
point with both of these
the
names was
US
the same,
defeated the
and it was a point that
Japanese
connected directly
in-
back
in-
to the
in
4
the,
yeses
about
Bondi
5
had given
months
him at
ago.
the start. The system prosecuted Avenatti.
and
The system prosecuted
something
Bankman-Fried.
that-
High-profile
the
cases,
Guadalcanal
difficult
invasion.
cases,
And
cases
in
involving
5 months,
people who had powerful
the Duke of
friends and
Wellington
public
defeated
profiles and
Napoleon
resources to
after he
mount
escaped from
serious
Elba.
legal defenses. The
In
DOJ
5
went
months,
after them anyway, and
a
it won.
baby
So the question Kennedy was building toward, the one that the entire
This has been
opening
the most
framework of
transparent
legitimacy and
presidency.
chaos
He's-
and social contract was designed to set up, was this: If the system can prosecute a celebrity attorney and a crypto billionaire, what explains its repeated failure to prosecute a single one of the men named by Epstein's victims? What explains the closing of that investigation in July 2025 with a memo saying no evidence was found? What explains the fact that over 1,000 trafficking victims have come forward, that FD 302 reports name at least 20 powerful men, that financial records show over 4,000 suspicious transactions totaling more than $1 billion, and that not one person who used Epstein's trafficking operation has been charged? Because if the answer is that there is simply not enough evidence, then the same system that built a case against Avenatti and Bankman-Fried should be able to explain exactly what standard of evidence it is applying and why that standard has never been met in the Epstein case, despite years of investigation, thousands of pages of victim testimony, and a financial network that left a trail across multiple countries and banking systems. And if the answer is that the evidence exists, but the investigation was closed anyway, then Kennedy's framework kicks in. Legitimacy is undermined, compliance is reduced, chaos follows, the social contract is violated. Those were not Kennedy's words alone. Those were Bondi's own yeses, given one after another before she understood where they were leading. This is the mechanism that Kennedy was exposing, not through accusations, not through theatrics, through logic, through a sequence of agreements that built a frame so solid that by the time he finished, the only way out was to either retract the yeses or explain the contradiction. And Bondi did neither.
Because here is the thing about the Avenatti and Bankman-Fried examples that makes them so effective in this context. Both of those prosecutions required the DOJ to go after people who had supporters, who had media allies, who had resources, who had every reason to fight back hard. The DOJ did it anyway. It did it because the evidence was there and because the law applies to everyone equally. That is what legitimacy means in practice, not just in theory. The Epstein case has evidence. It has victim testimony. It has financial records. It has photographs that the DOJ itself authenticated by redacting the faces of trafficking victims. It has witness statements that have never been followed up. It has a network of transactions running through Russian banks and international corridors that looks, according to investigators who have reviewed it, like the financial architecture of a transnational criminal operation. And it has a July 2025 memo from the Department of Justice saying that none of this rises to the level of opening an investigation against any uncharged individual. That memo and the Avenatti prosecution cannot both be the product of a system applying the same standard to everyone. One of them is an example of the law working as designed. The other is an example of something else. And Kennedy, without ever saying it directly, made sure everyone in that room understood which was which. Bondi's response throughout was careful. She agreed with the framework. She agreed that legitimacy matters. She agreed that selective enforcement is corrosive. She did not disagree with a single premise Kennedy laid out. What she did not do was explain the gap between a system that can prosecute Avenatti and Bankman-Fried and a system that closed the Epstein client investigation and said there was nothing there. That gap is the story. That gap is what over 1,000 victims are living inside every day. That gap is what the FD 302 reports represent, sitting in FBI custody with 20 names that have never been made public. That gap is what the Treasury file represents, with 4,000 suspicious activity reports that a senior senator has been fighting to access and been told effectively to stop asking for. Kennedy did not fill that gap in that hearing room. He could not. Filling it would require the DOJ to do what it has declined to do for years: follow the evidence, interview the witnesses, pursue the leads, apply the same standard to powerful men that it applied to a celebrity lawyer and a crypto billionaire. Until that happens, the 4 yeses Bondi gave at the start of that exchange will keep echoing. Legitimacy matters. The DOJ is central to it. Selective enforcement destroys it, and its destruction leads to chaos. She said yes to all of it, and then she went back to running the department that closed the Epstein investigation. Subscribe, hit the like button, and tell me in the comments, if the DOJ can prosecute Avenatti and Bankman-Fried, what is the real reason it cannot prosecute a single one of the men named in the Epstein files? Because Kennedy asked that question without asking it, and Bondi answered it without answering it, and somehow that was enough for everyone to move on. It should not be enough. It has never been enough, and the 1,000 victims who are still waiting know exactly how much it is not enough. And the system that is supposed to answer for that keeps folding its notes, leaning back, and moving on to the next hearing, as if the question was ever really asked, as if the answer was ever really given, as if 1,000 people's lives do not depend on someone finally deciding to treat this case the way it treats every other case where the evidence is sitting right there on the table.